When you think of ancient people and cultures that still exist in our modern world, you might think of the Israelites or the Copts, the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, or maybe the Iranians and the Greeks, known for their great empires. But few will think of the Assyrians or Chaldo-Assyrians, and a small population of Christian Semites, descendants of the first civilizations, who sprung up almost 5,000 years ago, converted to Christianity in the 8th century, and at the turn of the millennia lived in small groups in northern Iraq and Syria. The Chaldo-Assyrians are amongst the oldest still surviving culture in the Near East, surviving through hardship after hardship for more than 2,000 years, ever since the end of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Since when against all odds they persevered, they managed to hold strong against the nomadic invaders, like the Mongols, who brutalized entire cultures and people in their conquests. Regime change after regime change, and most notably, the forced deportation and liquidation of their people by the Ottoman Empire as part of the Armenian Genocide, or Seyfo, as it is called by the Assyrians. But even to this day, even after they ceased to be a geopolitical entity in the 7th century, their people still hold strong. But ever since the beginning of the 20th century, the situation of the Assyrians has become drastically worse and worse and worse, starting with a catastrophic genocide of hundreds of thousands of their own people, then becoming the victims of the newly independent Iraqi state, which then actively under Saddam Hussein aimed to eradicate their identity. And after the fall of the government, they, similar to the Kurds, Turkmen and Yazidis, became victims of the Islamic State. But where are they now, and how will their future look? The origins of the Assyrians are found in the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, of Sargon of Akkad, and in the years following, many small Akkadian city-states would rise. One of these city-states was Ashur, the city which would become the epicenter of the Assyrian civilization for the next thousands of years. Ashur would become, thanks to its central position in the Middle East, an important trading hub that connected cities like Babylon with the Levant and Anatolia. Its close proximity to the Tigris also proved to be beneficial, but the most profitable venture of Ashur and the Assyrians would prove to be the trade colony of Karum Kanesh in the Levant. The profits of the trading colony would be used to expand the city of Ashur and lay the foundation to the future rising empire. The resources from Anatolia, to which the Assyrians now had access to, would allow the Assyrians to begin perfecting ironworking, drastically improving its military. In the 18th century BC, Babylon, ruled by the Amorites, a people who previously had been driven out by the Assyrians, subjugated the thriving Assyrian state. But after the Amorite king Hammurabi died, Babylon collapsed, which allowed Assyria to break free. But the years following independence were not blessed with stability, as soon as the Assyrians managed to regain their sovereignty, a civil war broke out. In the 14th century before Christ, the Mitanni kingdom situated in modern-day Syria expanded into Mesopotamia and subjugated Assyria. Only when the Hittite kingdom of Anatolia invaded Mitanni, the Assyrian king Ariba-Adad I seized the opportunity and broke free from the Mitanni rule and conquered large part of the former Mitanni kingdom. The Hittites tried to stop the Assyrian advance, but were only able to fight it to a standstill until major defeat of Mitanni forces under Hittite command, which broke Hittite power in the region. Following the conquest, the Assyrians, out of fear of the Mitanni revolting, decided to deport the Mitanni from the now Assyrian lands and move Assyrians into the now freed up lands. In contrast to many other deportations we have seen throughout history, these deportations were not brutal in nature. They were rather caring, I'd say, as the Assyrians understood the importance these Mitanni people played in the Assyrian economy. This led the Assyrians to treat the Mitanni rather well, taking great care of them during the time of deportation. During the Bronze Age collapse, the collapse of the global system, which came as a result of the invasion of the Sea People, which originated in the Western Mediterranean, but also the invasion coming from the Arabian Peninsula by the so-called Desert People, also known as Arameans. But also massive famines were part of the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse destroyed most of the Bronze Age civilizations, but not so for the Assyrians. While it was in no way a golden age, it was not nearly as bad as the other Bronze Age civilizations. The Assyrian realm faced constant attacks by the Arameans and Amorites, which in the long run resulted in the Assyrian realm losing most of its newly gained land in the Levant. The Assyrian realm was largely reduced to its core territory around Ashur. But in the following years, Assyria would experience a golden age, conquering most of the Middle East, from Egypt to Iran and Anatolia to Arabia. But Assyria did not just succeed in conquering territory, it also flourished in the sciences, and the Assyrian military became the world's best, known for its brutality, which in our modern zeitgeist has been massively overplayed, exemplified by historian Simon Anglum and others. Anglum writes, while historians tend to shy away from analogies, it is tempting to say the Assyrian Empire, which dominated the Middle East from 900 to 600 BC as a historical forebearer of Nazi Germany, an aggressive, murderously vindictive regime supported by a magnificent and successful war machine. As with the German army of World War II, the Syrian army was the most technologically and doctrinally advanced of its day, and was a model for others for generations afterward. The Syrians were the first to make extensive use of iron weaponry, and not only were iron weapons superior to bronze, but could also be mass-produced, allowing the equipping very large armies indeed. But similar to any empire, this didn't last long, as in the 6th century BC, the Syrian Empire was conquered by the Babylonian Empire, which was then conquered by the Median Empire. The Seyfo, also known as the Assyrian Genocide, was a tragic chapter in history that unfolded during the First World War. It was characterized by the mass slaughter and deportation of Assyrian and Syriac Christians residing in southeastern Anatolia and Persia's Azerbaijan province. Ottoman forces, supported by some Kurdish tribes, were responsible for perpetrating these heinous acts against the Syrian population. Prior to the outbreak of World War I, the Syrians were a divided community, encompassing various churches such as the Syriac Orthodox Church, the Church of the East, and the Chaldean Catholic Church. They predominantly inhabited mountains and remote regions of the Ottoman Empire, which in some cases left them effectively stateless. However, the empire's efforts at centralization during the 19th century led to heightened violence and increased danger for the Syrians. The atrocities of the Seyfo commenced during the Ottoman occupation of Azerbaijan, spanning from January to May 1915. It was during this time that massacres were committed by Ottoman forces and pro-Ottoman Kurds, targeting the local Christian population, including Armenians and Assyrians. And additionally, in Bitlis province, Ottoman troops returning from Persia joined force with the local Kurdish tribes to unleash violence upon the Assyrian communities. In mid-1915, Ottoman forces and Kurdish troops launched attacks on the Assyrian tribes of Hakkari province, eventually driving them out. By September, despite their violent efforts at mounting a coordinated military defense, furthermore, Governor Mehmed Rashid initiated a genocidal campaign targeting all Christian communities in Diyarbakir Bekir province, including the Syriac Christians. While some part of Tur Adin offered sporadic armed resistance, the majority of the population faced relentless persecution. It is worth noting that Ottoman Assyrians residing in present-day Iraq and Syria were not specifically targeted in the genocide. The Seyfo unfolded concurrently with the Armenian Genocide and shared similar characteristics. Although it is considered to have been less systematic, while local actors played a significant role in perpetrating the violence, the Ottoman government also issued orders targeting certain Assyrian groups. Motives behind these atrocities including a perceived lack of loyalty among some Assyrian communities towards the Ottoman Empire, as well as a desire to appropriate their land. Despite the exact number of casualties being uncertain, the Assyrian Chaldean delegation claimed a loss of 250,000 lives, approximately half of the pre-war population. During the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, this was revised to 275,000 dead. During the Lausanne Conference in 1923, unfortunately, the Seyfo has received less scholarly attention compared to the Armenian Genocide, but efforts to recognize it as a genocide began in the 1990s, spearheaded by the Assyrian diaspora. While several countries acknowledged that Assyrians in the Ottoman Empire fell victim to the genocide, the Turkish government rejects these assertions. The modern Iraqi state is by no means a religiously and ethnically unified nation. There are three main groups in Iraq: the Sunni Kurds, who mainly live in the north, the Sunni Arabs, who live in the middle and west of the country, and the Shia Arabs, who live in the south and west. The Shia Arabs make up by far the majority of Iraq's population, making up about 60% of the population. 30% of the population is made up of the Sunni Arabs and Kurds. The remaining 10% of the population is made up of Turkmen, Yazidis, Assyrians, and other smaller groups. In 2023, Turkmen made up around 4 to 5 million of the population, Assyrians 0.5, and Yazidis also 0.5 million. It is important to note that in 1990, the number of Christian was around 1.5 million, but it has sunken to only 500,000 in 2023. Around the year 2000, the biggest communities of Assyrians were in Baghdad with 500,000 Assyrians, Mosul with 150,000 Assyrians, Kirkuk with 50,000 Assyrians, and Basra with 30,000 Assyrians, and Arbil. Ever since Iraqi independence, the ruling group was most of the time not Shia, what you might assume rationally, as Shias make up the vast majority of the population, and as we can see in history, most of the times the ruling group is the group that is the biggest. But the Sunnis, first during the Hashemite dynasty and then during the Iraqi Republic, aka during the Ba'ath Party ruled Iraq. This incentivized these regimes, especially under Saddam, to support policies of Arabization and Sunniization. Under Saddam, these policies became ever so extreme, especially in the north, which is much less homogeneous, and the ruling Sunnis make up only a small part of the population. These policies took the form of mass deportations into central Iraq, the enforcement of the Arab language, the destruction of villages, and in some instances, like the Anfal campaign, genocide, where the Iraqi government gassed tens of thousands of Kurds at the end of the Iraqi-Iran war. In the years of Saddam's reign, up to 200 Assyrian villages were destroyed. The region which experienced arguably the most Arabization was the city of Kirkuk, which is majority Kurdish and also has been declared to be the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan. Kirkuk is the center of Iraq's oil industry. It is surrounded by the richest oil fields in the region and is connected by pipelines to ports on the Mediterranean Sea. The Kirkuk field, discovered in 1927 and brought online in 1934, has still over 10 billion barrels remaining of proven oil reserves. During recent times, Kirkuk has accounted for more than a third of Iraqi oil exports. Kirkuk had been the primary target of the Arabization policy, which was systematically implemented over several decades. In the aftermath of the widespread anti-government revolt in 1991, the campaign intensified, specifically aimed at the Kurdish, Assyrian, and Turkmen populations in the Kirkuk region. Over the course of this period, it is estimated that approximately 120,000 Kurds, Assyrians, and Turkmen were forcibly displaced from Kirkuk and compelled to resettle in other regions of Iraq. In the years following the fall of Saddam, no unified legal effort was made to allow for deported people to regain legal rights to these homes they had lost. This resulted in mainly only Kurdish people reclaiming their houses, as they could more easily enforce their will. Similar to the prior regime of Saddam, the Kurds also began to evict still in Kirkuk residing Assyrians. Under the rule of Saddam, hundreds of Assyrian villages were destroyed. In the years following the fall of Saddam, the Americans tried to democratize Iraq, as well as include minorities in the ruling of Iraq. The first step in allowing the Assyrians to receive adequate representation in this new Iraqi state was made on September 14, 2002, when the U.S. Department called the Syrian Democratic Movement and its Secretary General Mr. Yunadam Kanan to participate in the next meeting of the Iraqi opposition parties. Later, on the 17th July 2003, the Iraqi Governing Council was inaugurated. There was an explicit effort to divide the seats of the new post-Saddam cabinet, which was appointed on the 9th of December, up between the different ethnic groups of Iraq. This was done by making each seat of the 25-seat cabinet represent 1 million of one ethnic group. So of course you have 25 seats for 25 million inhabitants, which Iraq had at that time. And this eventually led to Mr. Yunadam Kanan earning one of the seats and becoming the Minister of Transport for the new Iraqi state. But the years post-Saddam weren't those that were promised. While Iraq somewhat managed to democratize, the Shias just used their numerical superiority to win elections and democratically suppress the now marginalized Assyrians, Turkmen, Kurds, and Sunnis. The dismissing of the Iraqi army became the first step in an ever-declining Iraqi state, as now there was not one single institution that could stop Iraq from collapsing. Car bombings and open discrimination became ever so common for the Assyrians, and this was also the beginning of the Assyrian exit. The souring point would be the Arab Spring, as simultaneously to the withdrawal of the US Army from Iraq, the Arab Spring broke out across the Middle East and Northern Africa. With the aim of bringing democracy to the Arab world, it saw mass protests, with some being successful in dethroning the authoritarian leaders. This time of unrest led to full-on war in Syria, Iraq's neighbor. This soon spilled over into Iraq once the Islamic fundamentalist group ISIS, the Islamic State, rose up and later exploited the weakness of the central government in Iraq and took large parts of the country. An example of the trials and tribulations the Syrians faced in Syria as a result of the Islamic State's activities was the massacre in the Kabul River Valley. During the Syrian Civil War, which began in 2011, the Assyrian communities found themselves increasingly vulnerable and surrounded as various Islamist groups poured into Syria and Iraq. By 2015, ISIS had gained control over significant portions of Syrian territory, including areas surrounding Hasakah. The massacre that took place on February 23rd was part of a larger-scale assault by ISIS, extending from the western outskirts of Hasakah to the administrative borders of Serikanye, Ras al-Ain, further the west. Despite the efforts of the Syrian forces, including Natura, the Syriac Military Council, and the Kurdish People's Protection Unit, JPG, they were unable to withstand the attack and the front eventually breached. Only the Kabul River served as a barrier, preventing many Assyrians from safely crossing to the opposite bank. This brutal assault resulted in the abduction of 250 Assyrian individuals, predominantly women, children, and the elderly. It was the first time that the Assyrian community had experienced such extreme violence since their settlement in Syria in 1933. The attack shattered and dispersed the Assyrian community, leading the majority of the people to the cities of Hasakah or Kamishili for safety. Tragically, 11 churches were partially or completely destroyed by the jihadi militants, and 9 individuals lost their lives while defending their homes. Although Tel Tamar and the Kabul River Valley were eventually liberated from ISIS control, only a few Assyrians had returned to their homes. The prolonged conflict and its aftermath have instilled fear and insecurity among the Assyrian population, discouraging many from going back. Jamila Kako, along with her family members, were abducted by ISIS in a midnight raid. Following ISIS ideology, the women were separated from the men after their abduction. They were taken to Mount Abdulaziz, where ISIS had established its headquarters at Magloija, a location that has since become famous for Assyrian manual festivals. Subsequently, the hostages were transported deeper into ISIS territory, ending up in the city of Sadadi. In Shadadi, Jamila encountered 3 Yazidi women who had also been abducted by the group. However, this unexpected meeting of disparate Mesopotamian religious minorities was short-lived. In Shadadi, ISIS operated a slave market where the Yazidi girls and women were cruelly sold into sexual slavery. Prior to the Syrian civil war, the town of Tal Tamar, along with Hasakah and the Kabul villages, had been home to approximately 17,000 Assyrians. However, by the time ISIS launched its attack on the region, the population had dwindled to around 12,000 due to the displacement of Assyrians and migration. Jamila, now serving as an administrator in the Assyrian Martyrs Family Council, recounts her ordeals and highlights the urgent need for justice. The release of the abducted Assyrians occurred in several batches, with ransom payments securing their freedom. The exact amount of money exchanged remains unknown. Jamila herself was released on December 25, 2015, thanks to the efforts of the Assyrian bishop Mar Afram Athanael, who tirelessly advocated for his flock's release. The freed hostages were transported by bus to Hasakah. The last group of Assyrian abductees arrived in Hasakah on February 22, 2016. By the end of March 2016, all the abductees had been freed, except for 3 individuals who had been executed by firing squad in September 2015. This act of brutality served as a warning that failure to pay ransom would result in dire consequences for the remaining Assyrians. The years spanning from 2014 to 2016 marked the accumulation of the Christian and specifically Assyrian exodus from Syria and Iraq. As part of the exodus, around 1 million Assyrians left Iraq, finding new homes in the Middle East and the West primarily. The Assyrians have not only experienced mass exodus and persecution in the modern era, but also significant damage to their cultural heritage in the region. Numerous Assyrian churches fell victim to the destruction during the rampages of extremist groups. The height of ISIS brutality saw the deliberate targeting of many Assyrian historical sites. Among the notable ancient religious sites destroyed were the monastery of Saint Elijah, Saint Marcokas Church, Sa Kadima Church, Church of Saint Ahudemaha, Ma Bihanam Monastery, and the Assyrian Green Church. In addition to religious sites, the terror group also focused on ancient cities spanning from the Old to Neo-Assyrian periods. The ancient city of Nimrud, constructed by the Assyrians in the 13th century BC, suffered extensive damage as it was sacked by ISIS. Ashur-banipal II's palace, a significant structure within Nimrud, was completely destroyed during the rampage. Dur-Shakuhin, one of the Neo-Assyrian capitals, also met a similar fate. The destruction of these ancient sites was partially attributed to clashes between ISIS and Peshmerga, Turkish militant forces, who had militarized and fortified the areas. Satellite images later confirmed these findings, as revealed by the Iraqi government and local Assyrians. However, the most outrageous act of destruction committed by ISIS was the sacking and devastation of the Mosul Museum. The group took pride in broadcasting their looting and desecration of the museum, which included the destruction of statues depicting ancient Assyrian gods and other invaluable artifacts. Adding to the tragedy, the Iraqi government also has been implicit in the cultural genocide and destruction of ancient Assyrian antiquities. In March 2021, private contractors acting on order from the provincial government of Nineveh province dismantled sections of the ancient wall of Nineveh. This act drew significant condemnation from local Assyrian conservators and NGOs, highlighting Iraqi's disregard of Assyrian history and amid rampant corruption within the country. The situation today is not much better than it was a couple of years ago. Many Assyrians still experience hate, and many of the ancestral homes are destroyed. The future does not look good. Pray for Assyria. Thank you for watching this video. It has been a long time since I posted a video, 3 weeks. I have been very busy. I have been sick, and the worst of all, I have been very much busy watching a lot of Fish Tank. Luckily, it's over now, so you can enjoy the best videos on the platform. Really the best videos, of course. Bye. GNR out.